Sit by the kitchen door, please, so you don't spoil the photos. The words were whispered with a smile that could have passed for kindness if not for the knife edge beneath it. Sophie Kent Whitmore, radiant in her bridal gown, never dropped that smile as she placed her manicured hand on my arm. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, violins played soft jazz, and guests lifted champagne flutes in golden light. Yet, in that moment, the air around me froze. I looked down at the navy dress I had saved months to afford the finest thing I owned. In my lap rested a small white gift box, tied with a silver ribbon. I had imagined it opening with gasps of surprise, imagined my son's face lighting up when he saw what lay inside. Instead, Sophie wanted me hidden, tucked away where my wrinkles and weary presence would not intrude upon her perfect tableau. If you're watching this, please subscribe and tell me where you are watching from. Stories like mine matter because they remind us that dignity has no expiration date. My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 59 years old, a widow, and the mother of Daniel Whitmore, the groom who, at that very moment, was laughing across the room with his best man, oblivious to the humiliation being carved into my skin. Once, Daniel clung to my hand during storms, his small voice calling, "Mom, don't leave me." I stayed through the darkest nights, pressing cool cloths against his fevered forehead, whispering him back into safety. His father, Thomas, had died when Daniel was only 12, leaving us with little but debts and an old wooden chair that still bore the shape of his shoulders. I sold Thomas's watch to cover Daniel's tuition, skipped meals to keep him fed, and told myself the sacrifices were temporary, that love would be repaid with love. But here I was, asked to sit by the kitchen door like an unwanted guest. I glanced across the glittering hall. At the head table, Daniel raised his glass, his laughter loud, his smile radiant. He did not look my way. He did not notice Sophie's hand pressing me out of the picture. I felt Ruth's no, Margaret Doyle's eyes on me. My oldest friend, Daniel's godmother, sat 2 tables away. Outrage flickered across her face, but I gave her a small shake of my head. I didn't need her to fight this battle. Not here. Not like this. Instead, I smiled not with joy, but with something steadier. I rose slowly, the white box firm against my chest. My heels tapped across the marble floor, echoing like a drumbeat of defiance. Conversations faltered. Whispers swelled. But I did not falter. I walked past the head table, past my son, who never lifted his gaze from his friends, and I pushed through the double doors, into the cool night air. No one in that glittering hall knew what I carried. Inside the white box was not just a wedding present. It held the deed to a penthouse overlooking the Atlantic, worth more than $3 million, and a cashier's check for $4 million more. $7 million, wrapped in white paper and silver ribbon. My final sacrifice. My final attempt to be seen. But I was no longer sure they deserved it. The night air bit against my skin as I walked to the curb. A taxi pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I clutched the box tighter, feeling not just the weight of paper but the weight of years. Years of silence, of compromise, of believing that if I just gave enough, love would come back. It hadn't. As the cab pulled away, I looked down at the ribbon glinting in the streetlight. Once, it had symbolized hope. Tonight, it began to feel like armor. The taxi ride home was a blur of city lights streaking past rain-streaked windows. I sat rigid, the white box pressed to my chest like a shield. When the driver asked softly, "Long night, ma'am?" I only nodded. My throat felt too tight for words. Back at my apartment, the contrast was cruel. The elevator groaned as it carried me up to the 6th floor of a building, whose wallpaper peeled like forgotten skin. My 1-bedroom unit smelled faintly of radiator heat and old linoleum. I set the box on the table, its silver ribbon glowing faintly under the yellowed ceiling bulb. This was supposed to be my bridge back to my son. Instead, it had become a monument to a truth I didn't want to face. I had raised a man who no longer saw me. I boiled water for tea, the kettle whining like an old complaint. While the steam rose, I opened the little notebook where I tracked every coin: rent, utilities, soup cans, bus fare, always more expenses than income. Tonight, I added one more line at the bottom: respect, due upon receipt. I thought of Thomas, my late husband. He had been steady, kind, a man who never raised his voice yet, filled every room with quiet assurance. His old wooden chair sat in the corner, cushion sagging, arms scratched. I sank into it now, letting the fabric cradle me. Sometimes I swore it still carried his scent, cologne and tobacco, a faint echo of who we had been. I whispered into the empty room. I tried, Thomas. I tried to give them everything. The chair creaked as if answering. Memories rolled over me. Daniel at 8 years old, shivering with fever, his small hand clutching mine. The countless nights I worked double shifts, coming home too tired to eat, but staying up to sew the holes in his shoes. Selling Harold's watch, that last link to his father, to pay for graduate school. Every sacrifice stitched together by the belief that loyalty would be returned. And yet, at his wedding, he had not even looked up as I walked away. Sleep came in fragments that night. I woke often to the sight of the white box on the table, its ribbon like a silver slash in the dark. Sometimes I reached for it, half thinking I should march back and give it to him anyway. Maybe gratitude could still bloom in barren soil. But each time, I stopped myself. By dawn, exhaustion had dulled the sharp edge of humiliation. But not the ache. I dressed slowly, brewed a thin cup of coffee, and opened the curtains. The city outside moved on, indifferent to my quiet defeat. Yet, as the morning light touched the ribbon, I felt something stir, not hope, not yet, but something harder, a seed of resolve. They had told me to sit by the kitchen door. Maybe that was the last time I would ever sit where someone else told me to. It began with whispers, faint at first, then louder, as if the whole town had conspired to repeat Sophie's insult. At the bakery, where I bought rye bread every Saturday, the young clerk I once tutored as a child asked, too loudly, "Do you have the right change, Mrs. Whitmore?" His voice carried across the room, daring me to fumble. I laid out the coins with deliberate precision, my hands steady, my eyes fixed on his. He looked away first. At church, I felt the shift most sharply. Pew benches that had always welcomed me now seemed to push me to the margins. Friends who once asked after Daniel now averted their eyes, their pity clumsy and obvious. I overheard a whisper behind me. Poor Clara. Sophie was right. She's slipping. Maybe she shouldn't be in charge of so much. Sophie's poison spread quickly. She had not only humiliated me at the wedding, she had rewritten the narrative. In her version, I wasn't a mother wronged. I was a burden clinging to relevance. At the pharmacy, 2 women I'd known for decades spoke in hushed tones, certain I couldn't hear. It's sad, really. Millions in her name, and she can barely manage her rent. Maybe it should have gone directly to Daniel. Their words sliced cleanly. They doubted not only my competence but my dignity. I returned home each evening to my little apartment, the white box still untouched on the table. Some nights, I would open it, unfold the deed, smooth the velvet sleeve of the check. My name, clear and firm, stared back at me. Not Sophie's, not Daniel's, mine. Paper proof that I had not lost my mind, even if the world wanted to believe otherwise. Thomas's old chair bore witness to it all. I sat in it often, letting its creak answer my silence. One evening, as rain tapped the window, I whispered, "If I say nothing, they'll call me weak. If I speak, they'll call me bitter. What would you have me do, Thomas?" The room offered no reply, only the hiss of the radiator. But in that silence, I found a strange kind of strength. At Town Hall, during the annual vote, I signed my name on the digital ballot with a hand that did not tremble. The clerk paused, watching as the signature appeared bold and unbroken. Behind me, Mrs. Cooper, who had avoided me for weeks, shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, shame flushed her face instead of mine. Rumors thrive in shadows, but light, steady, and unflinching, makes them scatter. By the time I walked home that evening, scarf wrapped around my shoulders, I knew something had shifted. Sophie had tried to strip me of respect. All she had done was give me the chance to prove I still carried it. The white box on the table no longer looked like a burden. It looked like a weapon. The storm arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of rain that hammered against windows as if demanding entry. I was searching through an old desk drawer for a packet of stationery when my hand struck something solid, wedged at the back. I tugged, and out slid a leather-bound notebook, worn smooth at the edges. For a moment I simply stared. It was Thomas's. My late husband had filled dozens of these, each page marked by his meticulous handwriting, neat columns of numbers, charts sketched in pencil, notes about dividends and market forecasts. He called them his maps, the quiet architecture of the future he wanted for Daniel and me. I carried the notebook to the table, setting it beside the white box. The ribbon gleamed like a sentinel. With careful fingers, I opened the cover. At first it was familiar. Annotations about company growth, instructions to hold or sell, predictions of cycles. But midway through, the tone shifted. Sophie asked again about selling the portfolio. She insists money should move faster. I fear she sees only profit, not purpose. My breath caught. A few pages later, I always imagined leaving everything to Daniel. But today I overheard Sophie boasting, "I'd sell it all and double in a month." That was the moment I knew. They do not see what this represents. Clara does. She lives patience every day. This must go to her. Tears blurred the ink. For months I had asked myself if Thomas had chosen me merely out of practicality because I was left behind. But here was his voice, firm as ever, telling me the truth. He had chosen me deliberately, because he trusted that I would protect not just the money, but the meaning behind it. I ran my fingers across the ridges of his pen strokes as though touching him. Every long night I'd spent clipping coupons. Every time I'd stretched soup to last 3 meals. Every humiliation I'd swallowed so Daniel could thrive. Thomas had seen it. He had recognized it. The rain outside thrashed harder, but inside, something stilled. The notebook was proof, not just of ownership, but of intention. The inheritance was not a windfall to be liquidated. It was the embodiment of restraint, discipline, and sacrifice. It was the story of our lives, bound in paper. I closed the notebook and placed it atop the white box. Evidence upon evidence. Armor upon armor. That night, I dreamed of Thomas standing by the sea, his hands folded behind his back, watching the horizon. He didn't speak, but when he turned to me, there was a quiet pride in his eyes. I woke before dawn, the scarf pulled tight around my shoulders. For the first time since the wedding, I felt less like a widow stumbling through betrayal, and more like a steward of something greater. The world could whisper that I was confused, that I was unfit. Let them. I had Thomas's words inked on paper, and I had my own resolve hardening like stone. As the first light touched the ribbon on the box, I whispered into the stillness, "I will not fail you." Thomas. And for the first time, the promise felt possible. The morning after I found Thomas's notebook, I brewed tea and set the cup beside the white box, notebook stacked neatly on top. For months I had felt alone, but the words on those pages lit a small flame inside me. Still, even a flame needs shelter. The first knock came just after 9. When I opened the door, Margaret Doyle stood dripping on the threshold, rain running from her umbrella. Her eyes, sharp with outrage ever since the wedding, softened when she saw my face. I couldn't stay silent any longer, she said, stepping in and shaking the rain from her coat. In her hands was a thin folder. Clara, I reviewed Daniel's accounts at the bank. Sophie may call you confused, but I've never seen anyone steadier. Every share certificate, every account, your name alone. Thomas made sure of it. I pressed a hand to the table to steady myself. Margaret had been my friend since we were 12 years old, and in that moment, her loyalty felt like a wall at my back. Before I could speak, a heavier knock rattled the frame. I opened the door to find Jack Morales, my neighbor from across the hall. Broad-shouldered, a retired police officer, with a gaze that could pin a lie before it formed. He carried a stack of papers. I found these in the recycling bin, he said gruffly, placing the statements on my table. They were Thomas's old credit card bills, and there in black and white was Sophie's name, listed as a supplementary user. Vacations, jewelry, a luxury SUV, all charged long before the wedding. Your husband forgave her, Jack said, voice low but steady. But he didn't forget, and neither should you. I sat heavily in Thomas's old chair, overwhelmed. One ally was unexpected. Two felt like a fortress rising around me. By afternoon, a third knock came. Judge Nora Blake, retired but still formidable, entered with no folder, no documents, only her presence. Clara, she said firmly, I notarized Thomas's will. I also notarized his medical competency that same week. He was clear-headed, deliberate, unwavering. Anyone who claims otherwise is grasping at straws. Legally, your position is ironclad. Her words were like a stamp pressed onto my heart. I looked at the three of them, Margaret, Jack, Judge Blake, arrayed around my shabby apartment like sentinels. Each had carried a piece of truth to shield me. Each had chosen to stand when others whispered. The rain had eased outside, but in here, a storm was gathering, one that no longer frightened me. For the first time since Sophie had pressed her manicured hand on my arm and told me to sit by the kitchen door, I did not feel small. I ran my fingers along the edge of Thomas's notebook and whispered more to myself than to anyone else. She thought she could isolate me. She thought she could bury me under rumors. But I am not alone. Margaret reached across and squeezed my hand. No, you're not. And when the time comes, you'll stand taller than all of them. The white box on the table glinted in the fading light. Once, it had been a gift of surrender. Now, it was becoming something else entirely. Days slipped into weeks, and with them came a rhythm I had not known in years. Morning tea at the kitchen table, walks to the harbor where the gulls wheeled and cried. Evenings spent with Thomas's notebook open beside me, the white box resting like a sentinel on the shelf. One Tuesday, the mail brought a letter that changed everything. The envelope was creased at the edges, the handwriting looping and uncertain. Inside, a single page. Mrs. Whitmore, you don't know us, but we knew your husband. When our fishing boat sank last winter, we thought we'd lost everything. Our mortgage, our children's schooling, our pride. But because of the emergency fund Mr. Whitmore set up at the Harbor Trust, we were able to rebuild. We bought another boat, kept our home, and held our heads high. He saved not just our livelihood, but our dignity. Thank you for continuing what he started. It was signed, the Calder family. I sat for a long time, staring at the ink until the words blurred. Thomas had never spoken much about that fund. He'd called it a small safeguard, nothing more. But here was proof. It had saved lives. I whispered aloud. It was never just money. The truth landed with weight and clarity. The millions in stocks weren't numbers on a ledger. They were lifelines. Years of restraint and sacrifice crystallized into something tangible. Not a trophy, not a bribe, a tool. That night I called Margaret. I want to establish a fund, I told her. Something steady. Scholarships for harbor families. Emergency grants. Opportunities that last. Her pause was brief. But when she spoke, her voice carried conviction. Thomas would be proud. And Clara, you'll be more than a custodian. You'll be a builder. With Mr. Harrington drafting the legal frameworks and Margaret guiding the finances, we carved out a portion of the dividends. The principal remained untouched, safe. But its fruit would be redirected into what I named the Whitmore Harbor Fund. The first time I saw the letterhead printed simple, bold, carrying Thomas's name, I felt my spine straighten. For months, I had been reacting to Sophie's cruelty, to whispers in town, to Daniel's silence. Now, I was acting, choosing. At church the following Sunday, I wore the scarf with quiet pride. Conversations still hushed as I passed. But this time I did not shrink. I carried something stronger than gossip. Proof that wealth could be turned outward, toward light. For the first time since Thomas's death, I no longer felt like a widow defending scraps. I felt like a steward with a mission. The tide was turning not with noise or spectacle, but with deliberate, quiet motion. Exactly the way Thomas would have wanted. The first group of scholarship recipients arrived on a bright Saturday morning, the kind that smelled of salt and promise. I had baked bread before dawn, its golden crust filling my small apartment with warmth. By the time they knocked, the air was rich with it. There were 6 of them, young men and women from harbor families. Their hands bore the calluses of nets and ropes, of long hours bent against wind. One boy, Jacob, told me he wanted to study marine engineering, so his father's boat would never sink for lack of repairs. A girl named Laia spoke softly of her dream to become a nurse after losing her grandmother too soon. I listened as they spoke, one by one, and something inside me loosened. These were not just applicants on paper. They were echoes of Thomas's vision, children who would carry forward the dignity he had safeguarded. When I handed Jacob his envelope, his fingers trembled. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. His gaze lingered on the gray scarf around my shoulders. For a moment, I did not feel burdened by it. I felt armored. Then came the smallest voice. A little girl, no more than 7, had tagged along with her older sister. She climbed onto my lap shyly and unfolded a crayon drawing of a boat. In uneven letters, she had scrawled, "For Mr. Thomas." She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Thank you, Grandma Whitmore." The word pierced me. Grandma. I hadn't heard it in years, not since Daniel was small. To hear it now, from a child not of my blood, but of my heart, was a balm on the wound Sophie had cut, with her perfect smile and cruel whisper. I hugged the girl close, tears burning. "You're welcome, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick. Around us, the room filled with small sounds, gasps as envelopes opened, laughter of relief, the rustle of papers heavy with hope. My apartment, once a refuge of humiliation, had become something else entirely. A place of beginnings. That evening, after they had gone, I sat by the window. The scarf lay folded across the table beside Thomas's notebook and the thank you letter from the Calder family. 3 objects, side by side. Betrayal, memory, and gratitude. Outside, the harbor lights flickered against the water. Inside, I felt steadier than I had in years. Sophie's poison might still circulate, but here was an antidote stronger than gossip. Living proof that wealth could protect, not corrupt. The white gift box no longer seemed like a symbol of surrender. It had become a vessel of choice. And choice, I realized, was the truest inheritance I could carry forward. The email arrived on a Tuesday evening, its subject line too polished to be sincere. Opportunity for collaboration. It was from Sophie. I hesitated before clicking, but curiosity won. The message was smooth, every sentence shaped like glass. Mother, I believe it's time we rebuild. Daniel and I are leading a new development venture, luxury waterfront properties. With your resources, this could be transformative for all of us. It may also serve as a step toward repairing our family bond. I sat back in Thomas's chair, scarf tight around my shoulders. She hadn't written about reconciliation. She had written about leverage. Even forgiveness had been reduced to a transaction. I typed carefully. My words as plain as bread. Sophie, thank you for thinking of me. I will not be participating. I wish you well in your pursuits. No explanations. No cracks for her to slip through. 2 days later, a handwritten card arrived. The stationery was expensive, the script sharp. Mother, let us speak one last time face to face. At the lake cottage. Bring your friends if you must. I'll bring mine. Not an invitation. A summons. I placed the card on the oak table beside Thomas's notebook and the Calder family's letter. 3 artifacts. Memory, gratitude, and now, challenge. That evening, Margaret stopped by with tea. She frowned when I showed her the card. She's not looking for peace. She's setting a stage. Then let her, I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. I'll keep my door closed until it's time to open it. The showdown was coming. Not in whispers, not through rumors, but face to face. Sophie thought she was calling me to heal. She didn't realize she had summoned something else entirely. I traced the scarf's frayed edge. Once it had itched, like burden. Now it braced me like armor. For the first time in months, I felt almost eager. Sit by the kitchen door, please, so you don't spoil the photos. Her words still echoed months later, slicing through silence like a blade that never dulled. They were the reason I stood now at the lake cottage, the white box under my arm, the scarf tight around my shoulders. The place Sophie had chosen for this meeting smelled of cedar and calculation. Inside, Sophie sat with her lawyer, Mr. Kane, posture poised, eyes gleaming. Daniel lingered behind them, face pale, guilt written in the slump of his shoulders. Clara, Sophie began, with the same syrupy tone she'd used that day in the reception hall. I'm glad you came. We can finally put misunderstandings behind us. She gestured toward the white box. That belongs with us. Daniel is your only son. Surely you don't mean to cut him out. I set the box on the table between us. This box, I said evenly, was once my wedding gift to you both, but gifts can be withdrawn when respect is denied. Her smile flickered. It was a stressful day. I may have said something sharp. You told me to sit by the kitchen door. I cut in, my voice calm but unyielding. Not because the lighting was bad, not because of space. You said I would spoil the photographs. The silence that followed was thick. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. I opened Thomas's notebook, sliding it across the polished wood. His handwriting sprawled across the page. Clara understands patience. Clara knows purpose. If anyone can protect this, it is her. Mr. Kane read it, his professional mask cracking. This is explicit, he admitted. Sophie's tone sharpened. Fine. Yes, we've had difficulties. Daniel lost his job. The SUV is behind on payments. And the honeymoon debt is still there. But that's why we need help. You're his mother, don't you care? I felt my heart twist, but I steadied it. I cared enough to sell Thomas's watch for Daniel's tuition, to work nights so there was always food on the table, to dream of a day when my sacrifice would be met with gratitude. I lifted the box back into my arms, but care without respect is just exploitation. Daniel finally spoke, voice trembling. If I had stopped her that night, if I'd pulled you to the front, would the gift have stayed? My eyes burned, but I did not look away. Yes, Daniel, it would have, but you didn't. You let me walk out unseen. The truth hit him harder than any accusation could. He bowed his head into his hands. Sophie's eyes darted between us, fury barely contained. So that's it? You'll just throw us away? I stood, scarf falling loose, voice steady as stone. Number. You threw me away the night you pushed me to the kitchen door. Margaret, who had come with me, rose too. Her presence was a wall at my back. We're finished here, she said. I turned toward the door. The white box clutched tight. Behind me, Daniel whispered, Mom, please. I paused, hand on the doorknob, and answered without turning. When you are ready to knock without an agenda, you'll know where to find me. Outside, the mist lifted from the lake, the water catching a strip of gold sunlight. I breathed it in, letting the cold air cleanse me. The box was the same, but I was not. That evening, back in my apartment, I placed the box on the shelf beside Thomas's notebook and the scarf. I sat in his old chair and let the radiator hum fill the silence. For the first time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. The phone rang again and again, unknown numbers. Daniel, Sophie, but I didn't answer. Silence was my boundary, my final gift to myself. At dawn, I brewed tea, the steam curling like a benediction. I carried my cup to the window, watching the horizon brighten. The ribbon on the box glowed in the early light. Once, it had symbolized surrender. Now it stood for something harder, something truer. The dignity of saying no. I whispered into the stillness, words only Thomas would hear. I used to think inheritance was paper and property. Now I know it's choice, and I choose myself. The kettle clicked softly behind me, the building breathing steady. Down in the street, the city stirred awake. Somewhere, Sophie and Daniel were plotting their next move. But here, in this small room, I had already made mine. I closed the curtains gently and sat again in Thomas's chair. The scarf warmed my shoulders. The white box gleamed like a sentinel. For the first time in years, I felt wholly, quietly free. So that's the truth of how betrayal almost destroyed everything, until silence and strength turned the story around. But there's one thing I didn't tell you at the start. What if the betrayal wasn't just about money, but about love, power, and a secret no one expected? Click on this video here if you want to hear the next story of family, betrayal, and revenge. I'll see you in the next one.